Hail and welcome to Witching Out Loud, the podcast where we celebrate the art of witchcraft and conjuring magic in your daily life. Join us for a cozy chat about witchy ways and practical woo-woo.
I'm Crystal with Unveiled, necromancer, spiritual trainer, and mentor.
And I'm Kate, priestess for hire and an intuitive tarot reader.
Storm Faerywolf is a professional author, experienced teacher, visionary poet, and practicing warlock. He was trained in various streams of spirituality, magic, and witchcraft, and most notably, the Anderson Faery tradition, where he holds the black wand of a master. He's a chancellor of Modern Witch University, co-founder of Black Rose Witchcraft online course, a columnist for The Wild Hunt, and is the voice of the Witch's Power Daily podcast. He's written several books, including Betwixt and Between, The Witch's Name, The Satyr's Kiss, and for more, you can visit them at faerywolf.com, and I'll put all of that in the show notes. And I am so excited to have this conversation. I will start us off with an invocation I wrote inspired after reading Storm's book. In the beginning, in the darkness, in the deep, endless void, I was nameless. I was without form. Until breath found me. Until life stirred within me and called me forward. And in that moment, I became. I am life unfolding into form. I am the void and the elements, the seen and the unseen, the becoming and the being. I am magic. I am witch. I am magician. I am. Welcome
Beautiful.
to Witching Out Loud, Storm.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful, by the way. Wow. Gives me chills. I can feel the power in it.
Thank you. Thank you. I love writing those little invocations. Well, I have been at conferences with you. We have been ships passing in the night, but this is our first time meeting, and I'm so excited for this conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much for inviting me on. This is exciting.
My pleasure. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Introduce yourself to the Witching Out Loud crew.
Well, let's see. I'm a Pisces. I'm practicing warlock. I'm working to reclaim that term. I have been a practicing witch for more than 40 years, self-dedicated when I was 14 and kind of never looked back. And I lived my life as a public warlock. I endeavor to be a resource for the craft. And so thank you for giving me an opportunity to come on the show and do my great work, right?
My pleasure. You're our first warlock on the show. So tell us what the term means to you, warlock.
So yeah, this is one of those things that in the pagan community really raises a lot of eyebrows. And I actually do get a lot of flack and abuse online about it, which used to bother me. Now I just kind of find hilarious. But to me, a warlock is just a male witch. Full stop. I know that a lot of people in the pagan community are like, no, it means oath breaker. But this doesn't have any understanding of how language actually works. Many, many words meant something that they no longer mean. And warlock is one of them. More than 500 years ago, warlock, its original word meant oath breaker. But it was a firmly Christian era word. It's the breaker of a covenant. Exactly whose covenant do you think was being broken back then? So part of the covenant, we're talking about like the vows of the Christian church. And so a male practitioner of the craft was often labeled a warlock. I think because it was also considered almost like an extra crime, because it's to some degree, it could be considered a gender crime, right? Because the idea of witchcraft being a more feminine religion, a more feminine path, at least at the time. And so a man who would practice this womanly magic is extra going against the patriarchy, right? So I absolutely think that that's something that goes into that term, right? Now me, I just turned 55. And so I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And as a queer boy, I was often told, even before I came out and knew, that I was gay, I was often told that I wasn't a real man. I would never be a real man. Even after I came out when I was 17, people would say, well, you're gay, so you'll never be a real man, right? So part of reclaiming the term warlock for me is about giving myself a little bit of gender euphoria. It's absolutely claiming my identity as a man in witchcraft. And I get to decide what a man is for me. I'm not relying on any sort of ridiculous alpha male social looks maxing manosphere nonsense in order to define what a man is.
Right.
Because all of that is like the weakest possible version of a man. But yeah, warlock for me, is about claiming this idea of divine masculinity, which really is the opposite of toxic masculinity, which is what I just described with, again, the looks maxing, the alpha ridiculous nonsense, the male dominance. So I work to reclaim warlock as a potential term for men in the craft who wish to embrace the divine masculine. I'm also not here to say that all men who are witches are automatically warlocks. If you want to use that term, then you're free to use that term. If you don't like that term, you don't have to use that term. I would never use it to describe you if you don't like that term. But a lot of people are actually big mad about the fact that I'm using that term publicly. And they will say, oh, well, you obviously don't know anything about witchcraft. I'm like, child, I have been a witch longer than you've been alive. And not that that necessarily matters. I'm not one of those that feels like, oh, just because you've been around longer, that automatically means you're smart or something. But I have actually done research, and that is the dictionary definition of the word warlock. You can look it up. The fact that neo-pagans have decided that, oh, it means someone who betrayed their coven. Okay, but show me where, because that doesn't actually exist anywhere. If it exists, it's only in the writings of 20th century and later neo-pagan authors who have just assumed that this was true with no actual evidence. But I will concede that language is democratic. And so if enough people consistently use the word warlock, once again to mean oathbreaker, well, then that's what it'll become. But it ain't that now.
I absolutely love that definition. Like it's very similar to us reclaiming the word witch and taking that over. And like to us, it doesn't mean evil. And we have pushed it hard enough that it no longer does.
Well, there was a period right before our sisters who reclaimed the term witch, where in common parlance, if you use the word witch, it often meant an ugly old woman. And that's how it was used. And our sisters were like, no, nay, nay. We're taking this back. This is a word of power. And now, once again, it's a word of power. And this is the democratic use of language, right? So that's what I'm trying to do with warlock.
For being online and calling myself a witch. And people are like, well, why don't you use pagan? It's just more acceptable. I'm like, because I'm a witch.
Yeah, I'm not here to be acceptable necessarily. I don't actually care about that part. I mean, sure, politically, yeah, I get it. We want rights. We want to have equal rights and all that stuff. But that to get equal rights, we shouldn't have to edit who we are. We shouldn't have to kind of dim our light so that somebody else feels more comfortable in the hopes that maybe they will throw some scraps of human decency our way. No, I'm going to be offensive, thank you. And especially in this timeline, I think we need a lot more people to stand up and be a little bit more offensive, go against the grain, don't allow what's happening to happen,
Mm-hmm.
So
that's what I
never in the history of anything.
I'm a menopausal woman, 54, a witch. I have no fucks left to give. I'm going to get weirder. I'm going to get
exactly.
So much weirder.
When people want me to calm down or like to just be quiet, whatever, all I do is get louder. Maybe that's my Aries rising, but I'm like, no, the minute you tell me, oh no, you should just sit down and be quiet, I turn the volume up to 11. And that's me.
Wait, we're on the podcast, Storm. We do care. Well, thank you for that wonderful conversation. Tell me, your tradition that you follow is the Anderson Faery tradition. Tell us a little bit about that tradition. We haven't talked about that tradition on the show at all. So,
okay, well, obviously, I love the fairy tradition. And yes, often we'll call it the Anderson Faery tradition because, as I said to you before we started recording, it's a branding nightmare. There are so many things called fairy or fairy, the fairy tradition, fairy traditions, blah, 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 all the different spellings, right? But Anderson Faery tradition is a particular lineaged initiatory tradition of modern witchcraft that stems back to through the teachings and initiatory lineage of the late Victor and Cora Anderson. Victor claimed that this was a tradition that he was initiated into as a child. And when he was 9 years old, he had I think it was a vision. He was a little sketchy on that, but he had this vision dream, maybe, where from the woods near his home, he was born in New Mexico, that he heard drumming. So even though he was almost totally blind since an accident when he was 2 years old, he followed the sound of drums out into the woods, where he said he found a small dark woman sitting in a circle surrounded by several different brass bowls filled with herbs. And he instinctively knew to remove his clothes, and he entered the circle, and she initiated him into the craft and told him that he should be patient and that his people would find him one day. And he had this whole vision of the goddess and of the horned god. And then when he was 15, his family had moved to Southern Oregon, and that's where he found a group of witches practicing, and they called themselves the Harpies. And so when he was 15, he was initiated into that coven. And then the Harpy coven broke up somewhere just after World War II. And then somewhere in there, Victor met the woman that was to be his wife, Cora. And when they met, they instantly recognized one another because they had met already on the astral. And in fact, they had had sex on the astral several times. So when they met in person, they recognized one another, and they were married 3 days later. And they were together until Victor died in 2001. And so that was the beginning, I would say, of the modern fairy tradition. It's rooted in something older, something that probably didn't have a name beyond witchcraft, but it became called fairy probably through the work of one of Victor's early initiates, the late Gwydion Pentherwyn, who was very, very much interested in fairy folklore, very much into the old mythology of like the Irish and the Welsh. And so it's often said that the name fairy became accidentally attached to our tradition, probably through his work. But I would say, if I'm going to paint with a really broad brush here, one main difference between something like fairy and we'll say like Gardnerian Wicca is in Wicca, everything tends to boil down to some type of interaction that is based in fertility. And so it's very much kind of a gender binary type of mythology. I don't mean to say that in terms of Gardnerian being exclusionary, because there's a lot of really good inclusive covens in Gardnerian. There really isn't so much of a gender binary in fairy. Our ultimate deity, whom we often call the star goddess, is considered androgynous. And so that's our goddess. Our god is often the blue god, who is also very androgynous. So, and we don't have any gender roles in fairy. I would say fairy, it's less about fertility and more about ecstasy. So it's all about getting into different states of consciousness. We deal heavily with something called divine possession, where we actually allow different spirits and deities maybe to speak through us at different times. Kind of similar to what we might expect in a voodoo ceremony. Not exactly, but similar. But I first heard about fairy tradition in the pages of Starhawk's book, The Spiral Dance. And there was just something that clicked with me, especially when she talked about the blue god. And I think she only referred to him as like the laughing god of love, which really felt at odds with a lot of the male kind of god imagery that I would get from like public Wicca, the horned god of the hunt. And not that that was bad, but that just didn't resonate with me. I'm not a hunter. I'm a gentle soul. I'm more of an artist. And so the masculine horned god just never really did it for me. But the blue god spoke to me because it was about gentleness. It was about love and sensuality. And yet in this sort of masculine-ish figure, even though he's kind of effeminate, definitely androgynous. But also Starhawk wrote about Victor Anderson and referring to him as the blind poet and shaman, Victor Anderson. And there was just something so juicy there. And I knew in that moment, oh, this is for me. But, there wasn't a lot of public resources, meaning any, for a fairy, back then. On the surface, fairy can be perceived as being somewhat secretive. We have a lot of different lineages, and lineages do not agree on what material is considered secret or not. We have one core that everybody agrees is secret, but then that's it. And that's like basically what's in the initiation. And obviously I can't talk about that. But after that, really all bets are off. There's some stuff that's very, very public. There's some stuff that has gone in to be part of the reclaiming tradition, can be considered to some degree an offshoot of Anderson Faery, at least in part. And there's some of the tools that reclaiming uses from Faery, such as the iron and the pearl pentacles. Well, some lineages of Faery consider those to be secret. I remember this one initiate told me she was still really mad that Starhawk had published her book and she included the iron and pearl pentacles. It's like, oh my goddess, that was 1979. I think you need to let that one go, sweetheart.
Love that there's this gender neutrality to it. Kate and I have talked about on the podcast a lot about how very gendered most witchcraft and Wicca practice is, and how do we begin to make that a little more neutral. So I love that there is a tradition out there that is already doing that, and I had no idea. And when I'm dealing with spirit, gods, goddesses, deities, they don't feel gendered to me. They feel very much like they fluidly move between all of that. And my work in the last year and moving forward is how to blend that divine masculine and feminine energy. So we're both. And yeah, I love that. I think the more we can move our community towards that, the better.
Absolutely.
Well, what are you offering right now that kind of lights you up and gets you excited?
So my big calling in life has always been to be just a public priest of the craft. So I feel very fortunate. How I make my living is by teaching the craft and writing about the craft. And very fortunate to be able to say that. It's been a long road getting here. But one of the big things is that I'm, as you mentioned in the intro, I'm the chancellor of Modern Witch University, and this is where we host all of our online classes, and in particular, our Black Rose Witchcraft course. I'm working on that every day. We've got quite a good online community. We have a private Discord, and there's probably close to 600 people on our private Discord right now. Not all of them are active, but still, we have a pretty good active group. I feel so fortunate to be able to be a part of it. We just started it for a couple of reasons. One, necessity, but more of a necessity now. We used to have a shop, a brick and mortar store, but we closed it when COVID happened. And it was the best decision we made. I've always just wanted to work from home. So here I am. But having been that online university, it was already in full swing when that happened. So that really helped our transition. So the thing that's lighting me up now is just being able to work with students. I love it when I'm able to help a student feel energy or have that aha moment, not necessarily in terms of do what I'm doing, but maybe something that we're doing will then inspire them on their own path. And so that's always been kind of my guiding principle, is that I'm here to help the students discover whatever they need to discover on their own path. If that means coming through Black Rose and getting to the end and getting initiated, that's great. If it means halfway through, they realize, geez, I think I'm actually a Buddhist. That's great too, because that's my job. I feel my job is to help people more fully realize what their path is and how to effectively work on their path. The stuff that we write, Black Rose and even offering classes in Blue Rose Fairy tradition, that's secondary as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, that's great. I think it's beautiful. And I love it when people study fairy. I love fairy tradition, but that's also a little bit more private. That's not for everybody. And so I'm not really looking for getting a bunch of numbers there. I'm looking to get the right people, but ultimately, I really just want to help people find their own footing on their path. And so to me, that's the most exciting thing. It's just actually getting to work with people one-on-one and seeing those aha moments as they happen. That's so rewarding.
Yes, I agree. I'm a teacher as well. One, I teach for two reasons. One, I love that moment when something clicks for someone, or they see it in a different way and then share it, and then I learn something new.
Yes.
It's just this beautiful symbiotic relationship. I love it so much.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm always learning something new. And I think that that's really important. So if other witchcraft teachers are out there listening to this, I think that's one of the most valuable things about being a teacher, is that it puts us in this position of being a student. And so I think that any good teacher fully recognizes that we are ultimately students, that we're all students of the craft, no matter how many initiations we've had, how many honorifics, wands, whatever, tools, blah, blah, blah. We're all students. We're all children of the goddess, if you will. And so I think it would behoove a lot of our witchcraft teacher class to to remember that, because I do see a lot of ego in the occult and pagan communities, and people looking down their, third degrees, looking down their nose at the second degrees, who are looking down their nose at the first degrees. And I'm like, aren't we all in this together? If we're going to look down our nose at anybody, can't we all just look down at MAGA? Come on.
That would be lovely. Let's do that. Let's band together on that. Yeah, I hate the hierarchy that is part of our community. And I try very hard in my coven to remove hierarchy. I'm like, I won't even, I've called myself a high priestess, and every time I do it, I'm like, no, I really don't like it. I don't like the hierarchy, and want us to work in that more communal, collaborative, you have your strengths, I have my strengths. Let's blend them together, because as a teacher, we have to be in service to that.
But yet we are all in this together, and I think that the minute we think we have nothing left to learn, that's the moment we have nothing left to offer.
Yep, I agree. And it's called the mysteries for a reason. We're never going to discover them all.
Right. And we say about witchcraft that one practices it, right? So keep practicing, right? Just keep going, keep practicing. We'll get there eventually.
As adult learners, we want to get to the top. We want to get to the finish line and get the degree, all of that somewhat toxic masculinity, got to get the results, piece of our entire culture. But if we can just relax in learning and just enjoy learning for learning's sake, gosh, we get so much deeper.
I absolutely agree. I always want to take other classes, learn from other people. I think that's such a big value to the craft, to the community, when we can lay aside our own egos and really learn from one another. And maybe the thing that we're learning is I just learned that that's not how I want to do it. Yeah. That's valid. I'm not saying we have to incorporate everything that everybody brings up, because there's a lot of whack stuff out there. But you know what? I'm going to listen.
I just headed down the necromancer path, so I'm sure I'm going to make some more mistakes on that new path. It'll be fun. I'll learn something. Well, let's talk about your book, The Witch's Name, a little bit. The reason I know we've been in the same circles, even though we've never met, is because your name is so distinctive. And
it's working.
This person, and why have I never met this person? So share with us a little bit about your magical name, how you came to that, and then what prompted you into writing this book.
Okay. Well, I'm going to do it in reverse. What prompted me to write this book is someone was mean to me on the internet about my name, and I'm like, okay, to take lemons and turn it into a zesty lemon drop cocktail, I'm going to go ahead and take that meanness and now turn it into a book and hopefully make some money, right? But in this book, I detail not only some traditional approaches to taking a magical name and addressing why one might want to, but I also include my personal story of how I came to this wacky name, right? And I want to say, for the record, obviously I recognize how strange my name is. That's kind of the point. I do get weird flack from people. I
remembered it all these years, Storm, so it's working.
There you go, right? I will say, when I first started using this name, there were no other fairy wolves out there on the internet. That's why I was able to get the domain, faerywolf.com. There are other fairy wolves out there now, I will find. In fact, I was not allowed to have the username Faerywolf on old Twitter because somebody else had it. And it really kind of bothered me, because I try to be Faerywolf everywhere just for consistency. And then on Twitter, I had to be Storm Faerywolf. But anyway, it is a custom in many traditions of the craft to take on a magical name, the idea being that it represents your magical self as opposed to maybe your mundane self that has a corporate job and all the things. And the idea is that when you take on this name, you are adopting a persona. And this isn't to say that you're faking it, but you are allowing some more deep-seated part of yourself to now come to the forefront. And so some part of choosing of a name might include elements that are aspirational. For example, if someone felt that they were weak and they needed more courage, maybe they are going to incorporate elements of a name that make them feel bold, that make them feel strong and powerful. Maybe adding fire into their name might kind of fit that bill. And there might be some astrological ideas that go into it. It's really it's really about what is speaking to you on a personal level, and what do you want to put out there into the world. And so I was looking for a name for a really long time. And I will say the wolf had actually been coming up as an element ever since my childhood, but I never looked at it because in hindsight, I could recognize that I felt like I wasn't powerful enough to deserve something like wolf. I would have, back then, I would have felt more comfortable with something like mouse. I was very much a wallflower. I was very shy. Looking back, I think I've always been neurodivergent. I've never been diagnosed, but, self-diagnosed from the internet, right? I feel like, oh yeah, I've always been neurodivergent. So I definitely was kept people at bay. But later I would have some pretty strong visionary experiences with the wolf that I just couldn't deny. I did once when I was 19, spent a few months of homelessness. And it was a very trying time in my life. And then during a particularly difficult evening, I had this spontaneous encounter with this being that I would come to know as Mother Wolf. And she definitely felt like this fae being, but she presented as this silvery gray wolf in the moonlight and just gave me this sense of peace and kind of gave me just this sense that, okay, this too is temporary. I will not be in this situation forever. I got to hang on. And that presence was so comforting and empowering that later, when I had another dream, which in the dream I was a wolf, running up a mountain. When I woke up from that, I realized, okay, I have to adopt wolf. That's obviously part of this naming journey, right? I was also inspired by authors like Starhawk, who already had names that were so unconventional, but I really resonated with that because I always felt that I was a pretty unconventional person. And I did feel like my calling was to be a public priest of the craft. I kind of maybe got that idea from seeing Lori Cabot when I was a kid. She was on my TV running for the mayor of Salem. And she had this whole thing about she was a public priestess of the goddess. And that was due to some personal experiences that she had a deal that she had made with the goddess. If you get me out of this situation, I will do this for you. And then it happened, so that's her calling. Some people will make fun of Lori Cabot. Oh, she's a cosplayer, blah, 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 because she dresses in the black robes and everything. It's a serious religious thing for her, just like it's a serious religious thing for me. And so taking on the name Storm Faerywolf, that is a commitment that I have made to myself and to the public that this is who I am. I am in the world, but not of it. It's a reminder that every single day I focus first and foremost on my spirituality, my magic, that I don't want to quote unquote go to sleep again and just become like a normal mundane person. My work is about making the mundane magical. And so I'm Storm Faerywolf. Obviously here on this podcast, I'm at home, I'm Storm Faerywolf. When I go to the grocery store, I'm Storm Faerywolf. I do get some raised eyebrows. At times people ask what my name is, but that's an opportunity for me to really kind of assert myself as a public warlock. And there was an evolution of it. At first I was Storm Wolf, and that's actually my legal middle name because I had changed my name many years ago to incorporate, this. But the fairy came later. And that was a bit of an homage to not only the Anderson Faery tradition, but just to the fairy folk in general. I was raised on their stories. My mom was so fiercely proud of our Irish American heritage. And so that was definitely something that was always in the background was the stories of the little people, the banshee, all that kind of stuff, playing a role in the mythology of my childhood. So bringing that in kind of brings that energy in, all the parts of a name kind of bring in a current of energy. And then finally, the storm part was a very powerful dream I had that involved a tornado. It involved a magic ring that I actually had dreamed about as a child. It used to be a recurring dream that I would have with this magic ring. But in this more current dream, the tornado's coming. I'm trying to use the magic ring to diffuse it or whatever. And there's no hope. And I finally oh no, I give up. And the tornado picks me up and it was terrifying. And I thought, okay, that's it. I'm dead. There's nothing I can do. And I just surrendered to it. And in that moment of surrender, all the wind and the lightning and the hail and the rain all went into my body, and it just calmed down and let me down gently into the field. And then I just woke up just feeling buzzy. And so I realized, oh, Storm is part of that name too. So it just kind of all pieced together like spiritual Legos, and here I am. But it does actually, you might be interested to know, it actually off a lot of people. People will say things like I shouldn't be allowed to have a name like that. There was a friend of mine in our coven that was dating a guy many years ago, and somehow my name came up, and this guy made some off-color jokes, I guess, about my name, and my friend was a little offended. And this person said, it should be against the law for people to change their names to something like that. And my friend dumped him on the spot. It's like, oh my goodness, really? But I mean, I've got a lot of that stuff, like I can't take you seriously with a name like that. Well, first of all, I never asked anybody to take me seriously. I don't care if you take me seriously. I take myself seriously. And, and sometimes I take myself silly as well. Right. And that's okay. I often say as witches, especially, we need to make friends with silly,
You're like, you got me there. It's interesting to me because when I first heard your name, I was, and many others who have very distinctive names like that, like in awe of the outness of it. I stayed solitary until 2020. And I've been practicing since I was 13. Some religious trauma in there and fun stuff, of course. Every time I tried to come out as a witch. And like, I'm always in awe of someone that committed to their path and their craft and who they are. So that's what I always think when I see your name.
That's sweet. It's also a good dose of just stubbornness.
I love it. I really enjoyed your book. I have not taken any public magical name, but I have one that's private that I've created to work only with spirit. And I love that part in your book. I was like, oh yeah, I've done that and have never shared that with anyone other than my guides and gods. And I am at crossroads with my last name because I have some trauma that have just come to the surface. And I'm like, I think I want to change my last name. So I devoured your book. Like, how would I do this? And you gave one practical application. You gave your experience and you gave all of these exercises that go through this whole process for someone to work through their name. Like the amount of intention behind it was really beautifully done.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I love working with like hands-on stuff. I think that working with exercises, mental prompts, things of that nature, that helps us to work through our own stuff in a much deeper, more personal way. But thank you. I love it when I hear that people have actually worked with the stuff in the book. I think one of the best compliments I receive sometimes as an author, even if it was just one thing, and that's what I'm hoping really in all of my work is really simply to inspire people to kind of maybe create their own path, their own way. I think we can't forget that. We're not here to regurgitate tradition. We are here to engage tradition, to allow it to move through us, embody that tradition, bring it out into the world. It will change. It should adapt. Absolutely. And we're part of that adaptation.
I think that's part of what gets lost, to go back to our earlier conversation, is our traditions are living traditions. So they continue to change. And when we start to get so rigid on how it needs to be is when we start killing it off.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And of course, even as we might be practicing innovative ideas, and so many times people will put these together as a polarity, as if they're opposites, tradition and innovation. But that's a false division, really. And I think that's a lot of people will look at traditions like either you're in it or you're out of it. And I'm seeing tradition, especially like fairy tradition, as more like a lens through which we are viewing the world. And that frees us up.
Well, one of the other things I liked about your book, just from a business standpoint or product standpoint, like I saw how your framework on choosing a name could even be used in choosing a business name, in choosing product names, in choosing ritual names or coven names.
Yeah.
There was so many different ways I saw that you could use it. So if anyone struggles with those things, like I sometimes struggle, like, what am I supposed to call my business? And I just asked the spirits and they told me. So I'm like, I didn't put a ton of thought into it.
Easy peasy. Just ask the spirits. It's that simple.
Exactly.
I feel like an infomercial. There's got to be a better way. Now there is.
So yeah, I saw a lot of practical stuff in there. Are there other ways you have used it in your life as well as creating your own name?
I mean, yeah, certainly we've, you mentioned like naming a coven. That was actually something specifically that Crossed Crow asked me to put in the book, because of course this is the revised and expanded version of the witch's name. It was originally published by Llewellyn in 2022, and when Llewellyn told me that they were discontinuing it, I like just said, hey, Cross Crow, what do you think about this?
All right.
They're like, yes, maybe 10% more, at least 10% more material. And, you could maybe focus on these things, familiar names, coven names. Because, yeah, the process is the same, And so I give a lot of examples in the book of things that we might consider, numerology, astrology, these might be things, but also maybe pulling in, again, like elements from nature. Obviously, storm is a natural phenomenon, animals, plants, crystals, but maybe even historical figures from mythology or just from history. Anything that is inspiring, but it's the same process if we're doing our own name or if we're naming a coven, maybe even naming a ritual. I even have some exercises in there for creating magical words, which I was personally, that was some of my favorite stuff. If you think about it, all language is made up. Somebody decided at some point a long time ago that this sound meant this, and we just ran with it because we didn't have another sound. We're like, okay, we all just agreed. That's how language works. Language is democratic. Enough people use it a certain way and that becomes that way. But yeah, so, we could use any of these concepts, exercises to make up names or words. Just recently, this past February, I was teaching at Convocation in the Detroit area. And one of the things that we did was to make spoken sigils. And it was the idea that just like if we were going to make a sigil, like a drawn symbol, one of the many ways in which we could make sigils is to take a word or a short phrase, get rid of the repeated letters, and then you take the remaining letters and just kind of arrange them artistically, right? Well, we could do the same thing, but instead of creating a drawing, we're going to take those remaining letters and we're going to make it into a nonsensical word. But it's not nonsensical because we know what it means to us. And this is really kind of along the same idea of what in occultism is often referred to as the barbarous names. These special magic words that we don't really know etymologically how they might have a definition. They might have a etymological history, but we don't know. They're just gone. If they were ever real words, and we don't know if they ever were, but if they were real words from a now dead language, we don't have the language that it comes from. So they just exist on their own. But it's believed that simply by pronouncing them, uttering these words, that occult forces gather, when do that. And so there's a long history of using these otherwise nonsensical words in our magical ritual in order to affect magical change. So why couldn't we just make up our own? So you can make up your own magic word for, prosperity, for protection, whatever it is. And then you just have this word at the ready and it's a magical trigger for you. And you might then just utter that word, maybe under your breath. And then if you've worked with it energetically enough, you will get that sense of that shift. And all the witches know what I'm talking about, the shift where it's like you go into that, it's just everything changes and you're in that mindset and suddenly you're powerful, right? Mm-hmm. You were having a bad day before, scattered, maybe you felt weak, and then something crossed you and you're like, no. Now I'm in that
Witch
space,
mode
right?
Activated.
Exactly. And these words can be used as triggers, for that, to put us in a particular state of magical consciousness.
I'm super inspired by that. Thank you for sharing that. I have been working on creating a sigil to protect digitally, like to protect my information, my image, all of that digitally. And I love the idea of having a word. Then when I jump online, I can say that word to activate that as thing. Love it. Super inspired by that. Thank you.
Awesome. Yay. Thanks for saying so. That's great. That's all I could ask for.
Right? The whole conversation was worth it today. Actually, I thoroughly enjoyed having a conversation with you today. It's wonderful.
Me too.
Anything else you want to share about your work, your book, things that are coming up and what you're up to and how people can connect with you?
Well, let's see. I'm very excited, obviously, to talk about the witch's name. I mean, they're all my books are my babies, to a degree, and I love them all. But the witch's name has so much of my personal story in there that I'm so grateful that it gets a second lease on life now through Crossed Crow Books. If people want to know more about me, you could go to my website, faerywolf.com. That's FAERY wolf.com. And that has links to everything. There's also our online store where obviously I sell my books, but we also sell oils and dress candles. And my husband does a lot of like woodworking stuff, like divination tools, talking boards, spinning tarot wheels and the like. And you can find us there at daturatrading.com. But of course, our big thing is modernwitchuniversity.com, where we teach online classes, including the Black Rose Witchcraft course. That's really where I spend most of my time. Yeah, but also right now, I just turned in another manuscript to Llewellyn. The title is still in the ethers somewhere. We're figuring all that out, but it's a book on an energy work practice for witches. And so kind of bringing all of those energy practices that maybe we know and love, but now giving them kind of a witchy update. So now it's in this witchcraft aesthetic. I'm comparing and contrasting some other cultural ideas with working with energy, but I'm doing my best to not just wholesale steal those, from other cultures, but just kind of comparing, contrasting to some other stuff that I do. A lot of it is just kind of my personal practice that was just mostly intuitive. I wasn't even necessarily thinking about it until I sat down to write this book. And that was an interesting process of like, oh, I have to describe how my energy body feels while I'm doing, this, that, and the other. Yeah, but I tend to write more poetically. And I kind of feel like that goes hand in hand, so hopefully I did a good job. We're in the final edits now.
I love energy work, and I spent many years working and studying energy work. So I'm very excited to see that.
Yeah,
All of my
I love
books
it.
are super old. Like everything I have on energy work is probably maybe the newest is the 90s.
I feel you.
So give me something
Same,
new.
right. So far, they like it. I got good feedback immediately from the Llewellyn folks. So that always feels nice. But yeah, I've been doing energy work for a really long time, doing energy with people. We realize that a lot of people are intuitively drawn to this, but maybe haven't had the experience of actually feeling the energy, or probably they felt the energy, but they weren't consciously aware that they were. And so that's something that I'm bringing to the mix for these people, is through something I'm doing, helping them to be aware of their experience in the moment. And that's really a game changer. So that's something I'm hoping that I'm bringing in this work, is more exercises, more experiential stuff to help people embody this work and to be consciously aware of it.
Yeah, I think more and more people are becoming aware of how our energy affects. And of course, science is now catching up to show what witches have already known for many centuries about how our energy fields interact. So it's fun to watch. I think you'll do really well with that.
I hope so. Thank you.
When I got my Reiki master, it definitely felt like more power. It was like the opening when you envision the chakras opening, like it just like
Right.
expanded. I was like, oh, I can hold that much energy. Okay, let's go.
Yeah. I think a lot of times people think, oh, it's just my imagination.
Mm-hmm.
If anything there's nothing just about your imagination. Your imagination is amazing. Even Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge, right? Because knowledge comes from imagination. You have to have the imagination first to even try out a new theory.
Yep.
If you have a theory, that's because it was born in your imagination. Yes, then we should test it. Absolutely. But that imagination is not just a form of weird entertainment. This is where all ideas come from. And using focused imagination can really lead us into some places of self-discovery. And one of those is the ability to feel energy. And I think when we quiet down and become silent enough to actually listen to our body, we can be quite amazed, because otherwise we're just living in this capitalist society and everything is just fast and loud. And we have to really tune everything out just to get through our day. And then in the craft, we have the opposite problem. It's like, no, we need to learn how to not filter all that stuff out all the time. We have to learn how to really get quiet and listen. And that can be really uncomfortable, because this is also kind of leading us into the reality of shadow work. If we get really quiet and start listening, we're going to start hearing stuff from our shadow that we don't want to listen to. But if we really are the badass witches we claim to be, then we need to actually look at what's going on in the shadow, allow that, have a space, confront it, work through it. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but evolution does not happen in our comfort zone. So let's get evolved, witches.
Well said. I think that's a great thing to end on.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed getting to know you and your practice and your history. and talking about your book. And thank you for agreeing to be on the podcast and sharing that with all of our listeners as well.
Of course, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm very grateful. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right, well, let's go do some witchy shit.
Right on. I'm with you. Let's go.
Thanks for listening to Witching Out Loud. You can find us at Witching Out Loud on Substack, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook. Follow us for highlights and reminders. Subscribe for witchy tips, seasonal celebrations, and extended show notes. If you love our show and want to support us further, there's an option to support us monetarily on Substack, as well as sponsorships and advertising opportunities. So please share with us how you are witching out loud. Now go do witchy shit.